Good morning, Year 10. So this is our final lesson of the week. And at the beginning of the week, we were looking at propaganda, and I had asked you to look at 4 different posters and annotate those posters. So I just want to recap on that and talk about a little bit of analysis on each of those posters. So what you will notice with every single one of those posters, they rely quite heavily on guilt to persuade men to join the war effort. If you think of one of the images in particular, there's a dominant image of a woman standing proudly as the soldiers head off to war. And what that does in essence is really present this very idealistic, romantic image of war. And that relates to the stereotypes that were being churned out at the time of men needing to protect the women in their lives. You'll also notice how colour was key in many of the posters. So the blue and the green often worked to convey a sense of calm and highlight the idea that by joining the war effort, that life at home would actually remain calm and remain safe, and you would be doing your part to help that. An imperative has also been included, and an imperative is like a command. And we talked about that, I think, the last day. So that has also been included where it says, "Women of Britain say go." And that, what does that do? Well, it creates a sense of urgency, and it highlights the extent of the support that there was for war, or what they were trying to put forth. And what we're going to do today with this in mind is we're going to look at a poem. And it is by a lady called Jessie Pope. And it's quite a well-known poem, and it's called Who's for the Game. So you will notice that I have attached worksheet 12. I've attached 2 worksheets today. But at the beginning of this lesson, I want you to look at worksheet 12, which is actually a copy of the poem. And you will notice down the side that we have the flirt, the little flirt, I was going to say mnemonic, but acronym that we've been using over the last few weeks. And as you go through the poem, you can fill these boxes in as we go. So Jessie Pope was a journalist who wrote recruitment poems for the Daily Mail during the First World War. The poems that she did write were positive propaganda poems for the war. So you're going to notice this poem that we're about to read is very, very different from the one that you read a few weeks ago, which was Wilfred Owen's poem. Pope's objective was to encourage patriotism in the readers, or inspire it, so that the men would join the forces. She wrote a persuasive poem, Who's for the Game, where she compares war to a game. And you can see that in the title here, Who's for the Game. And essentially what that shows is that her attitude to war was basically that it was one great big event that everyone should take part in one way or another. So that title's quite short and punchy. And it's a question which is really inviting anyone to answer, for not just the men signing up, but women, how do you play your part as well? And what is important to note is even just like the tone, we talked about the tone of those posters the last day, and think about the tone here. Before I say any more, I'm just going to read the poem to you. Who's for the Game by Jessie Pope. Who's for the game? The biggest that's played, the red crashing game of a fight. Who'll grip and tackle the job unafraid, and who thinks he'd rather sit tight? Who'll toe the line for the signal to go? Who'll give his country a hand? Who wants a turn to himself in the show? And who wants a seat in the stand? Who knows it won't be a picnic? Not much, yet eagerly shoulders a gun. Who would much rather come back with a crutch than lie low and be out of the fun. Come along, lads, but you'll come on all right, for there's only one course to pursue. Your country is up to her neck in a fight, and she's looking and calling for you. So as you can see, this poem was quite controversial at the time because many felt that it gave the wrong impression of war, that it was actually very misleading, particularly when you compare it to Wilfred Owen's poem that we read a week or two ago. And Pope was therefore ridiculed for writing this poem because in it she compares it to a game like rugby. And that at the time, and still today obviously, was a very popular sport amongst men. And she treats war, she kind of plays it down as if it's just some big game. But she's also very clever in comparing it to a game, because in this sense, what she is doing is she is appealing to masculine instinct and encouraging men to recruit, that the men will rise to their duty without any fear. And that final line, and who thinks he'd rather sit tight? In other words, she's asking, are you going to be a coward and do nothing? Or are you actually going to get up and do as a man what you should be doing? And really what she's doing there is she's trying to evoke guilt. She's trying to make men feel like cowards if they're not going to sign up, if they're not going to do anything, if they're not going to play their part. So she is trying to evoke this sense of guilt. And what's important to know in terms of context, that wasn't uncommon at the time. That would have been put across in lots of the propaganda that was going out, because that was seen as a useful strategy, putting men in awkward positions so they would feel embarrassed if they would choose not to fight but to actually stay at home, because that would be to take the easy route. And there would have been lots of poems and propaganda like that at the time. And you'll notice in the second verse then, it talks a lot about patriotism and giving your country a hand in fighting against the enemy. And we'll talk more about that the next day. But what I would really like you to do is just very quickly maybe fill in one or two of those boxes, just of things that jump out to you as you go. In terms of the language that's being used. We've talked about rhyme and rhythm before. The tone, I've mentioned it quite a lot there. And then what I want you to do, this is the main task today, is to answer these questions. And I'll just read through them very quickly with you. In your own words, what is Jessie Pope's poem about? So essentially, this other sheet is to help you answer these questions. But I don't mind if you just go straight to the questions. If you don't really need that wee extra support, you can go straight to the questions. So in your own words, what is Jessie Pope's poem about? Number 2, to whom is the poet asking the question? Number 3, what is the central metaphor in the poem? So that whole idea of a game. And what effect does this have by comparing war to a game? What is similar about every fourth line, and what effect does this have? Now, I'm quite aware that it's not laid out properly in this sheet. I'm just going to pop onto your PowerPoint here, and maybe you get a better idea of what it looks like. So we're going down and we're looking at every fourth line. And who thinks he'd rather sit tight? And who wants a seat in the stand? 1, 2, 3, 4. Then lie low and be out of the fun. Okay, 1, 2, and so can you notice any wee pattern there? I don't want to spell that out to you. Obviously, you know that there's questions, but who's that question being addressed to, and who's it really being pointed at? Number 5, choose 2 images used by Pope to describe the war. What impression does she create in these images? Select 3 different examples of your shampoo techniques. What effect do these have on the reader? Now, all I'm asking you to do is maybe pick one of each. So maybe talk about a metaphor, or talk about alliteration, or talk about rhyme, or talk about a rhetorical question, whatever it happens to be. Just if you can find 3 examples. If you struggle with that, go for one. And I don't want you to be panicking about question 6. Number 7, the poet uses a friendly conversational manner in the poem. What effect does this have on the reader? Could you hear that even when I was reading it to you? You could hear the tone coming through. Why do you think she's opted for that very friendly, casual, conversational manner? Is she trying to get the reader on side? And what is Pope's opinion about the war? So do you think she's pro-war? I think that's very obvious. Explain your thoughts clearly, but you've got to use evidence to support. So I know that seems quite a lot, those 8 questions today, but you didn't really get 3 lessons this week, so it isn't too difficult, I don't think. And homework this week is meant to be just designing a poster, encouraging men to go to war. But you know what? I think if you answer those questions, I will be happy enough, because I think you've been inundated with so many bits and pieces this week for options week that I think you just need to go off and enjoy your half term. So if you answer these questions, I will be very happy, and I hope you have a lovely half term. Speak to you soon.